There are some amazing restaurants out there with histories as rich as their foods and drinks. You could spring for a Michelin star restaurant serving 4-course meals for $500 a person that's been open since the French Revolution. Or you could go check out a hole-in-the-wall tavern in England where soldiers stopped on their way to Jerusalem during the Crusades. Or you could get a bucket of chicken in China from arguably the first restaurant in the world. The possibilities are endless. Here are some of the oldest restaurants in the world that still exist. CBC, Chinese Bucket Chicken. We get the word restaurant from France after a soup vendor named A. Boulanger opened up shop in Paris in 1765. The term itself comes from a type of restorative meat broth. In the next couple decades, restaurants took off across the country as more and more people started enjoying the luxury of having someone else cook for and wait on them. But really, the first restaurants popped up about 600 years earlier in China. Back in the 1100s, the Song dynasty in China was home to cities like Kaifeng and Hangzhou, which each had over 1 million people living in them. They were bustling downtown entertainment districts that hosted travelers from all over. They had hotels, they had bordellos and bars, and many, many restaurant options. There were noodle shops, dim sum spots, hole-in-the-wall dives, expensive Song dynasty versions of Michelin star restaurants. I mean, they had it all. At the fancier spots, there was a practice called the singing waiters. First, they'd bring out a bunch of pre-plated sample dishes so you could get a sense of what the food looked like. Then they'd put on the theatrics. The following comes from a Chinese document from 1126 describing what happened next. The waiter took their orders, then stood in line in front of the kitchen, and when his turn came, sang out his orders to those in the kitchen. Now that's what I call service. Of course, other spots weren't as elaborate. There's one in particular that still exists even today. It's called Ma Yu Qing's Bucket Chicken House, and it was opened in Nanjing way back in 1153 by the Ma family, who had to flee Kaifeng after the Jin dynasty invaded the northern Song dynasty. Centuries later, in the 1800s, a descendant of that same Ma family made his way back to Kaifeng and opened another Ma Yu Qing's Bucket Chicken House, just a simple, unassuming takeout spot. If you're ever in Kaifeng, go get some of the oldest traditional Chinese roast chicken around. It's called bucket chicken, not because it comes in a bucket, but because they hollow out the chicken and poach it in a secret recipe broth, making it look like a bucket. A bit different than the bucket you get at KFC. Sobrino de Botín. Sobrino de Botín in Madrid holds the Guinness World Record for the oldest continually operating restaurant in the world. It's been going strong in the same spot since 1725. It has a pretty storied history. Renowned artist Francisco Goya washed dishes there while he was in art school. Ernest Hemingway loved drinking there during his many trips to Spain. The last scene in his novel, The Sun Also Rises, takes place there, and the characters order the restaurant's signature dish, cochonillo asado, or roast suckling pig. Spies would swap intel there during the Spanish Civil War. The place is packed with history. Botín wears its age proudly. There are creaky wooden floors and cavern-like brick walls that have absorbed centuries of chatter. Its brick oven has seen more roasts than most chefs have seen in their lifetimes. The flame in the oven has apparently never been extinguished since the restaurant opened. Luckily, the place has never burned down. Botín's menu hasn't changed much over the years. Traditional Spanish cuisine like the aforementioned roast suckling pig and roast lamb are staples of the menu. The restaurant is pretty proud of them. Here's a quote from their website, translated into English from Spanish, of course. Little by little, slowly, lambs and piglets brown in the heat and solemn breathing of the old oven. Fueled with oak wood, these logs and their embers, strategically placed to the left of the stove, harmoniously distribute the flavor of salt, pepper, water, lard, white wine, bay leaf, onion, and garlic throughout all the pieces. Now that's a description Hemingway would approve of, I'm sure. Also not a very vegetarian-friendly place, as you can imagine. Le Grand Véfour. Le Grand Véfour, right in the beating heart of Paris, is a place where history didn't just dine, it had a dank feast. It was founded in 1789, just as France was about to flip its lid with the storming of the Bastille, the event that kicked off the French Revolution. Imagine Robespierre and his crew plotting the future of France between bites, and aristocrats downing their fancy red wine, oblivious to the guillotine waiting just around the corner. Nowadays, walking into Le Grand Véfour is like stepping into a time capsule, but with way better food. The place is a living museum of French luxury, velvet seats, crystal chandeliers, paintings that have seen more history than most textbooks. It's like eating in the Louvre, only the food's better and you don't have to stand. And the food. It's French cuisine killed with a precision that would probably make Napoleon proud. The menu's a nod to the old world with a wink to the new. There's foie gras that melts on your tongue, truffles that smell like the forest floor after a rainstorm, desserts that look like they belong in the window of a Parisian jewelry store. It's the kind of place where you order wine that costs more than your plane ticket. But if you can afford it, why not? Old, but in a different way. This next restaurant is old, but not in the way you'd expect. Go to the new Lucky restaurant in Ahmedabad, India, and you'll be dining with the dead. The restaurant combines the daily bustle of a restaurant with the solemn tranquility of a graveyard. It sits on the site of an old Muslim graveyard. No one is really sure who the graves belong to exactly, but some say they were followers of a 16th century Sufi saint. Instead of just relocating the graves, the restaurant's layout was designed around them. The graves, which are scattered all throughout the restaurant, are encased in raised platforms and protected by metal railings. Diners at New Lucky Restaurant find themselves eating beside these graves, sipping on coffee or enjoying traditional Indian dishes like curry. The restaurant was founded 50 years ago by a guy named Krishnan Koti, who bought the property before realizing he maybe made a grave mistake. You see what I did there? He took it in stride though, and he opened the restaurant anyway, and it turned out to be a good move. The place has been going strong for half a century. Honke Owaria. A couple of centuries after China's first restaurants started popping up, Japan got in on the action. One of the trailblazers of Japanese cuisine was a guy named Senno Rikyu. Rikyu was initially all about the tea. He became the tea master in the late 1500s for Toyotomi Hideyoshi, also known as the Great Unifier of Japan. But he also helped start a tradition called kaiseki, a seasonal, multi-course dining experience that was way ahead of his time. One of the oldest restaurants in the world opened before Senno Rikyu was even born, and still incorporates the tradition of seasonality that he helped start. Honke Owaria restaurant in Kyoto, Japan was first opened in 1465. The interior of Honke Owaria is in the traditional Japanese style. There are wooden beams, tatami mats, and sliding paper doors. Maybe you're lucky enough to grab a private dining room with a view of a small, beautifully maintained garden. But how private can the dining room be if it's only got paper doors? The menu at Honke Owaria is centered around soba, or buckwheat noodles, which are famous for their delicate texture and flavor. These noodles are made in-house using ancient techniques passed down from generation to generation. You can choose from a whole slew of soba dishes, served hot or cold, each accompanied by different broths, dipping sauces, and seasonal ingredients, just like Rikyu would have done. A Crusade pit spot. England has a lot of inns, pubs, and taverns claiming to be the oldest around. Since the 1100s, there were places where people came to get angry, where revolutionaries plotted and schemed, where writers and academics went to have often deep, drunken conversations, where travelers would stop for a night on their way to the Crusades. One pub in Nottingham claimed that it's been around since then, and it has a name to prove it. Ye Old Trip to Jerusalem is the name of the pub. It's a great name if the stories about it are true. It claims to have been established in 1189 AD, though the earliest parts of the current building date from around 1650. The pub's name comes from the legend that it was a stopping point for knights on their journey to the Holy Land during the Crusades. The pub's historical link to the Crusades is one of its marketing strategies. It's said that Richard the Lionheart and his men gathered at the inn before setting off for Jerusalem, although direct evidence for this is more legendary than historical. Ye Old Trip to Jerusalem is built into the rocks beneath Nottingham Castle. There's a network of caves underneath it that were carved out of the sandstone centuries ago and were used as brewery cellars. There are also rumors of hidden tunnels leading from the castle to the pub, tunnels which were possibly used for secret meetings or escapes. If you ever wander into the pub, be sure you don't lay your hands on a small model ship encased in glass. Legend has it that the ship is cursed and that cleaning it has led to the untimely deaths of previous cleaners. It's remained untouched for many years because of this, just gathering dust in its case. Another curious item in the pub is the so-called pregnancy chair. It's said that women who sit in this particular chair will become pregnant shortly afterward, a superstition that thankfully hasn't been proven true. Maybe all that ale has something to do with it. They serve pretty good meat pies at Ye Old Trip to Jerusalem too. France's Tavern. The Francis Tavern in New York City is one of the United States' oldest restaurants. It's also been through some of the heaviest, revolutionaryest stuff in American history. For a while, George Washington literally lived there. Before the Revolution kicked into high gear, Francis Tavern was one of the secret meeting places for the Sons of Liberty. Revolutionaries plotted against the British, organizing attacks and so forth. One time, they dragged a British naval captain to the tavern and forced him to apologize for the British Tea Act of 1773 as the crowd gathered and jeered at him. The revolutionaries then dressed up like Native Americans, and they stormed onto the boat the officer came from and chucked all the tea it was carrying into New York Harbor. It was Boston Tea Party, the sequel. The tavern was also hit by a cannonball fired by the British Royal Navy ship HMS Asia. This happened in August of 1775 after some Americans, including the Hearts of Oak Militia and Alexander Hamilton, stole cannons from the southern point of Manhattan and fired on the ship, which fired back, missed, and hit some unsuspecting bargoers. Then, in December 1783, just a week after the British troops evacuated New York, effectively ending the war, George Washington hosted a farewell dinner at Francis Tavern. It's since been called the Turtle Feast, and as the name suggests, they ate turtle soup in particular. The dinner was held in the building's long room, and it was Washington's chance to bid farewell to all the officers who served under him during the war. He reportedly went up to each one of them and whispered some profound statement through his wooden teeth. Thanks for watching. Are there any ancient cuisines that you'd like to learn about? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more nutty history.